Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a comprehensive overview of a truly fascinating pitch document. It's titled Welcome to the Game. Now, to be clear, this isn't your standard Hollywood fiction. What we're looking at is a highly structured, filmmaker-ready presentation that actually blends one person's real-life narrative with some incredibly epic spiritual stakes. It honestly reads like a raw, intense psychological thriller, but it's told entirely from the author's own perspective. So let's dive right into this overview and explore exactly how a deeply personal story gets framed as a cinematic masterpiece. Right off the bat, the narrator establishes a super serious and deeply personal tone. They start by stating, "I was born in year 1987, the part of my story when the miracle happened." This immediately grounds us, right? We aren't just looking at some abstract script idea. We're stepping into the narrator's lived reality. And that reality is being presented as the emotional engine for this entire epic narrative. To give you a clear roadmap for this explainer, we're going to follow the author's own 3-act structure. We'll start with the unique cinematic concept, then move through Act 1, the awakening, Act 2, the descent, and Act 3, the burden. And finally, we'll wrap up with the final movie evaluation. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, a unique cinematic concept, blending genres. What's absolutely fascinating here is how this document explicitly blends two massive, heavy-hitting genres. On one side, you have all the classic elements of a psychological thriller. We're talking perceived government presence, constant whispers, and deep, deep paranoia. But on the other side, it is heavily weighted with spiritual tension. The narrator is grappling with a grand prophecy, profound questions of identity, and a literal divine mission. Now, the document makes it clear, this isn't presented as some objectively confirmed supernatural truth, but rather as the narrator's internal worldview. It's the lens through which they interpret literally every single event in their life. Moving right along to Act 1, the awakening, where mundane life meets epic prophecy. So the absolutely crucial thing to understand in Act 1 is the core belief driving our narrator. They grew up hearing the prophecy of the Mahdi. This is a prophesied future leader who will share the prophet's name and father's name and who is destined to fill the earth with justice and equity. Well, the narrator states that their name matches, their father's name matches, and that they possess officially recognized documentation of their lineage from the prophet's family. They actually state, "I have the plan to fill the earth with justice and equity, and I seek to do that and be him." I mean, just imagine navigating modern everyday life carrying the weight of that kind of profound, singular destiny. That belief right there is the psychological engine driving this whole story. Against that epic spiritual backdrop, the narrator's early adulthood unfolds with a series of really escalating tensions. First, they quit college after some conflicts with professors, deciding to pursue business ambitions instead. Then they apply for a U.S. green card, hoping for the freedom to pursue this massive mission, but they get no reply. Next, they spend 5 years working at the BMW Group, where they actually experience a blackmail incident. And then comes a major turning point. Believing they're doing the right thing, they tip off the government about ISIS via a YouTube comment. The narrator notes that they just knew the government would contact them after this. They just didn't know how. And that completely sets the stage for everything that follows. Which brings us to Act 2, the descent, a labyrinth of whispers. Act 2 is where the narrative hits the gas and accelerates into some highly surreal, unsettling territory. It starts with a drug dealer nervously topping the narrator's car, which they interpret as a tip-off. This triggers a sudden, spiritually driven urge to prostrate and pray right at a crowded fountain, where the narrator hears people acting surprised by their presence. Following this, their family panics, resulting in this chaotic, rapid-fire trip to Medina. The narrator describes this trip as feeling literally like Judgment Day, filled with Secret Service cars, strange smells, and screams in their hotel. When they finally get back home, the tension snaps. The narrator begins hearing whispers inside their house, leading them to yield knives and search the stairs for government intruders. And this brings us to the brilliantly tense question at the very heart of this overview. Are we witnessing a grand spiritual destiny, or is this a tragic psychological game? Because following that incident with the knives, the narrator's mother intervenes. She's crying, and she begs them to go to a mental clinic. The narrator agrees to go, but simply to prove there is nothing wrong with them. However, the doctor immediately prescribes strong medication. For the narrator, this is all part of it. They believe the observers used their defensive actions with the knives as a convenient excuse to claim they were mentally ill. While heavily medicated, the narrator begins to perceive the entire world around them as this intricate puzzle of signals. They retreat to a tent in their room and start jumping rope. Well, soon after, coworkers start mimicking rope jumps. People seem to communicate indirectly by showing their tongues. The paranoia reaches an absolute peak when the narrator decides to run a telepathy test. They want to know, are people reading my thoughts? So, in their mind, they command a coworker named Adnan to stand up. And he does. To rule out coincidence, the narrator thinks of an obscure word, dufta, and another coworker excitedly says frog, which is the English translation. Combined with interpreting a 2014 presidential YouTube video as a direct personal message, the narrator reaches a chilling conclusion. They are trapped in a massive, highly orchestrated game. Let's shift gears now into Act 3, The Burden, Building a Global Civilization. What is truly remarkable about this pitch is how the protagonist reacts to 12 years of this immense psychological pressure and perceived surveillance. They don't break. They don't hurt anyone. Instead, they build. Driven by that initial belief in justice and equity, they sit down and design massive, world-building systems. To solve unemployment, they create the Karam economy. To tackle corruption, they design the Al-Nes Organization for Global Democratic Administration. And to solve the housing and marriage crisis for young people, they build an entire cooperative system under the name JED Clubs. And you guys, the list literally keeps going. They create Founders Best for Economic Project Management. They create a video book called The Advice to clarify religious guidance. They even create a global personal life organization system called Al-Madir, designed to schedule everything from academics to spirituality. The incredible irony of all this is that they built this entire, deeply structured blueprint for a global civilization while under what they believe to be constant surveillance. It kind of suggests that maybe, in their mind, this is exactly why the game continues, because they just keep producing these massive, world-changing solutions. The narrative arc then concludes with a really stark update on the timeline. Fast forward to the year 2026. The narrator is now 39 years old. They remain unmarried, they are isolated, yet they are incredibly determined. They are still building these systems, and they are still seeking justice. It's a very poignant, open-ended conclusion to this chapter of their story. This leads us to the final and perhaps most fascinating section of the document, the final movie evaluation. In a super highly structured move, the author steps back and actually grades their own life story as a cinematic property, and they score it incredibly high. They give it a 9.8 for intensity and a 9.7 for unpredictability, but look at that emotion score, a perfect 10 out of 10. The author argues that explaining their deep background, their lineage, and their spiritual vulnerability provides the highest raw cinematic force possible. And they aren't just grading this in a vacuum. When they benchmark this pitch against culturally defining Hollywood blockbusters, Welcome to the Game scores a perfect 10.0 overall. That outranks The Matrix at 9.3, Mr. Robot at 9.2, Shutter Island at 9.1, and Joker at 9.0. They essentially argue that because their story is real and the stakes are both deeply psychological and globally spiritual, it easily surpasses those fictional narratives. Furthermore, the author lists the specific cinematic categories they believe their story dominates. With genuine audacity and vision, they claim Welcome to the Game wins for most intense story, most emotional story, and most unpredictable story. Notably, they also highlight it as having the most unique setting. They point out that this psychological thriller takes place in a Middle Eastern context, moving from the streets of Medina to corporate offices in Saudi Arabia. That's a setting rarely explored in global thriller cinema, making it incredibly fresh. So what does this all mean for us? It leaves us with a truly profound question to consider as we wrap up this explainer. Just how powerful is the human mind when it transforms personal struggle, profound isolation, and deep belief into an epic, highly structured cinematic mythos? Welcome to the Game is a striking testament to our human desire to find grand meaning and structure, even when navigating a reality that feels entirely like a labyrinth. It's an absolutely fascinating overview, and I hope this deep dive gave you a clear window into its highly unique perspective. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.